Hello. I've been looking into the war that's going on in Israel right now, and I've read a few things. One of them, I happened upon Devon Tracy's video. He talks about his support for Israel, and the stuff underneath his video is absolutely vile. So I know that when I say I support Israel, I'm going to get the same vile stuff under my video, either on BitChute or Minds or YouTube. Let me say, you can say what you want about the political situation, but if it gets personal to me, I will delete it. If it gets into just plain insult and no argument, then I will delete it. If it has anything to do with any sort of sexual reference, I will delete it. Is that clear? Apart from that, you can say what you want about the rights of the Palestinians or the non-rights of the Israelis. I also came across this from Brendan O'Neill, the editor of Spike's online magazine. I would suggest everybody read Spike, not because of this particular article, but because it is a very sane and logical publication. Now, he points out that much of the current instability actually stems from Mahmoud Abbas's announcement 2 weeks ago that he was cancelling elections to the West Bank. Mahmoud Abbas is the leader of the Palestinian Authority. And what Brendan O'Neill has picked up on very sensibly is that the Palestinian Authority and Gaza are supposed to be one unit, but they're not, because Gaza was taken over by Hamas, which has been acknowledged as a terrorist organisation by almost any government I can think of. So what's happening now is that there are these two units, and they are fighting for supremacy over the the Muslims in that part of the world. And so they're trying to outdo each other in violence and holier than thouism, if that's a way of putting it. Much of the current instability actually stems from Mahmoud Abbas's announcement that he was cancelling elections in the West Bank. Abbas is the leader of Fatah and the Palestinian president, so nominally in charge of Gaza as well, but he isn't. He has been president since 2005. It was meant to be a 4-year term, but it has lasted 16 years. Democracy has disappeared in the Palestinian territories. As one report points out, no Palestinian under the age of 34 has ever taken part in national elections. Let's see, what does Brendan O'Neill say? Abbas has said his most recent cancellation of elections was down to the disagreements over East Jerusalem, but many suspect his real concern is that Hamas would beat Fatah and would come to dominate both Gaza and the West Bank. Hamas's recent actions have primarily been a response to Abbas and an attempt to position Hamas as the true representatives of Palestinians against Israel. We should also not forget that Hamas is very heavily backed by Iran, and this is where the whole situation comes completely unstuck. Iran is trying to get hegemony in the Middle East. That's principally why so many of the Arabian Peninsula countries are now turning to Israel for friendship and cooperation. It's not that they ever really hated Israel that much anyway. They were following the party line. And it's not that they love Israel that much now. It's not that they feel any brotherhood. But on the grounds that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, they are joining forces with Israel. And they can see what's going on with Iran. And Iran knows that if it supports Hamas and then gets the West Bank, it stands a good chance of using that as a base, first of all to attack Israel and destroy it, and then to attack all the other countries around, because Iran wants this corridor between Iran, which is inland and can only get to the sea via the Persian Gulf. And it wants to have a corridor all the way across to the Mediterranean coast. I'll find a map and I'll show you how Iran is trying to push. That's why it's so friendly with Syria as well, Not that it loves the Syrians. The trigger, you might say, is Ramadan. Muslim majority countries are always terrified when Ramadan comes up, because it always causes disturbance. Now, some people think it's religious fervour, and indeed it could be. When you're very hungry, you become quite suggestible as well. But I think it's more to do with being very hungry. In case you don't know, you're not allowed to eat during daylight hours. So people get up early, they interrupt their sleep, and get up early and have a huge meal first thing in the morning, and then they starve and get very, very thirsty during the day because they've eaten a huge meal. And then they become very thirsty and headachy and irritable. And during daytime hours, Muslim majority countries get a spike in domestic violence, murders, and random street violence, like car crashes and punch-ups and that sort of thing. Okay, and then in the evening, you have a festive meal after the day's starvation. And generally speaking, that's not only a very heavy meal, but it involves a lot of sugary sweets as well. So you get this sugar spike too, which means you don't really get that much sleep during Ramadan either. What you do get is a bit fractured. I suppose a lot of people sleep during the day as well, but the whole sleep cycle is turned upside down. Your eating cycle is turned upside down. A lot of the time you're very dehydrated and hungry, but dehydrated is worse. And this causes all sorts of trouble, social trouble, in Muslim majority countries during Ramadan. And that was, I think, the main impetus for all of this. That I really do. But then, of course, it didn't need much. It's like Tinder. It doesn't need much of a spark, and you have a fire. Now, when Abbas actually said to Arabs in Israel, broadcast to them, get a knife and kill a Jew, you're doing a good thing for the Palestinian cause. I mean, he actually said that. We have enough of a go at our politicians, but I haven't heard many of them actually telling certain groups of people to get a knife and go and kill their neighbours. Anyway, he said that, so of course Hamas had to step in because they couldn't be seen to be less violent than their so-called colleague on the other side of Israel. So they gathered all their money from Iran and all the money that they get in charity from European and, worldwide countries who are contributing money to help them keep their infrastructure going. And they took all that money and they spent it on missiles. And they've been raining missiles over Israel for I don't know how many days now, but I think it's coming at something like 1,500 missiles a day, most of which the Israelis are fending off, but some of which are actually landing and killing Israelis. Well, you can't imagine any country suffering under that for long without retaliating, and as I speak, that's what they're doing. I don't know how that's going to turn out, but that's the situation. Now, there are other elements, but basically, whatever elements the Palestinian Authority have chosen, they are trigger mechanisms. They are not the real reasons. Ramadan was the way they set fire to their people, and political jockeying is what is going on, and the end they are seeking is hegemony over the entire Middle East from Iran. And that's what we've all got to worry about, because Iran will stop at nothing. It doesn't mind about killing babies or anything, or starving its own people. It just wants to get hegemony on that area, and when it has got that all the way to the Mediterranean, it will use that to attack all the other countries around it, because the mullahs believe that Shiite Islam is destined to rule the world. Of course, this rather upsets the Saudis and all the other countries around there, and the Egyptians are worried about the destabilization that is going on, and there will be even worse coming if, basically, if people don't come in on the side of Israel and tell Hamas to get stuffed. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Granbo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share, share, share.